Oh, we're counting down. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Tofalos at health.detective, and this, I'm delighted to say, is Scott Zimmerman from the good old US of A. Hi, Scott.
Hey, how's it going, Nick?
Yeah, good, thank you. And thanks so much for giving up your Sunday morning to come on and chat with me in the
Yeah.
afternoon in the UK. Whereabouts in the States are you?
New Jersey, and we have a beautiful blue sky day,
Yeah.
and so I can't complain a bit.
Nice. Well, and hopefully you can get back out to it sooner rather than later then.
So where are you in the UK?
Well, I'm in the northwest of England, not far from Manchester.
Yeah.
It's actually out in the countryside, not far from the Yorkshire Dales. So I'm right on the edge of Lancashire and Yorkshire, which is the two roses, the red rose and the white rose. And this area is renowned for its wet weather.
Yeah.
It's grey, it's wet, it's the north, but it's rolling green hills, it's beautiful countryside, it makes fabulous beef and lamb and good dairy as well. So we're blessed, really. It's a beautiful part of the world. And when the sun shines, it's magnificent. Yeah.
And you got to walk around and enjoy it, right?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Truly, you sometimes, it's just, I think we all are guilty of it. We take for granted what's on our doorstep sometimes, and everybody else comes and goes, "Whoa, look at the view from here," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, same one I see every day." But yeah,
Well, I'm lucky we have a little bit of land so that I've got some space and a little green, and
yeah,
can't complain.
beautiful, fabulous. Now, I wanted to ask you before we get on to your sort of area of expertise, which is that you're an optics engineer, and you're a light researcher too. But when you going way back to the start of your life, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I don't know. I always wanted to be an engineer. I actually had a good friend, family, that he was an engineer, and I went and talked to him in high school, and he explained what I did, and I said, "Hey, I can do that." And
Yeah.
but it's warped over the years. I started out in mechanical engineering, went on and did a bunch of display work and lighting work, and my what I really love though is the process of discovery. I have 85 issued U.S. patents, and um, that's kind of what I do. And it's frustrating because the process of discovery is really messy, and all this stuff that's going on here lately about misinformation of that. Every research paper has a flaw in it, and it's
Mhm.
actually those flaws that I look for when I'm doing what I do, because those are the places where you can change things. And it's unfortunate that we have this new mentality that we don't want to, that everybody is being shut down as misinformation or disinformation or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's really kind of stupid when you get down to it, because that's how we discover stuff is question, you
Yeah.
know, argue, you know.
I think that's a big problem. I've always been interested in history, and I was listening to a podcast about the Second World War, where they were discussing before the war broke out, um, because of the rise of fascism and communism back in the 1930s. They were really worried about the threat to democracy of these sort of totalitarian regimes, and they realized, how do we protect democracy? And it's actually simple. And I think we're at a bit of that crossroads now. And the answer that was simple was they set up debating societies all over the land, so that we could all come together with different viewpoints and have mature discussion, and sometimes go away holding your beliefs, sometimes going away thinking maybe they have a point. But it was about open, healthy debate. And I fear that's gone, or it's going.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah, we don't want to get off in the weeds here, but like I say, from my perspective, I've spent my life doing discovery, and
Yeah.
there's everybody likes to talk about the science, and
Hmm.
as I say, innovation is not science, and very seldom is science innovation, because what we do, it's very important what researchers do at universities and things of that nature. And providing that to the public is extremely important, in my opinion. It's what I do. But you have to translate that from science into real products and or something that is of real benefit. How
Yeah.
many times have you heard some university announce some breakthrough, and then 10 years later you maybe hear about something where that was associated. Doesn't demean science, doesn't mean science is wrong. It just taking something from pure science and putting it into something that is useful takes time. And, that's what I think is the sad part. And unfortunately, now the government is putting, we can talk about it about lighting, but the DOE, in particular, Department of Energy,
Yeah.
is doing things that are very harmful, in my opinion,
Yeah.
to people's life. And hopefully we can talk about why that's important. And,
Mm.
but anyway, enough of that.
Well, I think we have a similar situation over here with the this drive for energy saving, what appears to be energy saving at any cost,
Exactly.
which appears to be a problem now. So go on,
And
please.
I've been lucky here lately. I've been working with Glenn Jeffrey and Bob Fosbury, and outstanding people. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sitting there. I'm an optical engineer. Try that again. Let's just let's explain that to me one more time. When
they're
Bob's
sharp.
talking about nebulas and all this
Yeah,
other stuff,
yeah. They are
but
very
but
sharp. Having listened to them both,
yeah, and
but so are you, Scott.
well, all I guess I'm just saying is that I was really surprised when I got into this work that I thought, oh, this has all got to be known, and the optics of the body and things of that nature. And I was really lucky that Russ Ritter um, was willing to kind of take me under his wing. But quite honestly, the one of the motivations has been I was really ticked off because the IES and all these other people were totally ignoring the health aspects of light
Yeah.
at that particular point. This is 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm.
And they were passing certain rules that essentially determined that LEDs were the only choice that we should be providing to people. And I was doing the optics of the body, and the body was clearly showing that there was all these other wavelengths that we don't see with our eye that are just as important and maybe more important than what we see with through our vision. And it's hard. I keep on trying to make the argument for people that we've gone through the most radical reduction in solar exposure in human history. It's more than what we had when we had rickets. It's different, but it is actually a bigger drop because it's global, and it's being driven by a lot of these government mandates that, as you say, is energy savings at any cost. Well, you could take one person gets sick for a day in a year, and you've just wiped out any energy savings that they got from the quote unquote change in lighting, because it's health is much more energy intensive and are the maintenance of health
Yeah.
than anything we can do from the standpoint of changing from incandescent over to fluorescent over to LEDs. And so, but it's just frustrating because, like I say, I started looking at the area. And once you start looking at the optics of the body, you start seeing how it's designed optically to do certain things and use wavelengths that we don't even pay any attention to. And
Yeah,
which is frustrating.
we've forgotten where we've come from,
Yes,
and
exactly.
start to hide from the very source of life.
Well, I mean, as Bob would tell you, it really is the source of life. I mean, unless what happens is that when sunlight comes into the atmosphere and into the earth, it basically sets up a energy source that we then take advantage of. Trees take advantage of it one way, we take advantage of it different ways, and the body is essentially evolved and gotten more and more complex because that complexity allows it a higher percentage probability of survival. Now all of a sudden we've walked in and we've taken away the majority of that energy from our daily lives. And because people are indoors, they're exposed to LED lighting and contact fluorescent lighting, you know, and it just trickles down the entire chain, into how the quality of our food and all these other things that are important. How are the quality of our eyesight, the myopia epidemic, things of that nature, all related, interrelated to us
Yeah.
shifting the spectrum in a radical way. And the sad part is that it was easy to do because everybody has a pair, or most people are lucky enough to have a pair of eyes they can see, and that's what they assume is sunlight. And unfortunately, that represents only about 10% of sunlight.
Yeah.
The other parts that we've essentially either blocked or severely restricted um, have a function as well. And now we're finding out that that's some pretty important stuff that we should be doing. And so many, if I always get in trouble because causality versus correlation, all that. But everybody's got a brain. They can look and they can see that there's things that are getting worse. We're seeing a lot more learning issues within various populations. We're seeing health issues as far as mitochondrial decay and astronauts that are exposed to these narrow band emitters like we have in LEDs. So it's just an interesting and almost humbling situation to go in and look at optically at what goes on in the body, because all of a sudden you start to see, well, why is it doing that? Well, it's
Yeah.
doing it because I go type Google and go in and look at a biological and oh well, that might be why it's doing it, type thing.
Yeah.
So
So let's go back to the source, first of all, which is the sun.
mhm.
So, what is sunlight made of?
Okay,
There you
well.
go. Boom.
Well, sunlight, and I'll try and do this as best I can. Sunlight, you of course start with the sun. The sun is basically a black body emitter around 5,600 Kelvin. That means, by definition, a black body is got content over a huge spectral range. So what we think of as UV sunlight starts out around 285 UVB, where that is used for vitamin D production. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
UV bad, blue bad, all these things that they start talking about. But then it extends all the way out to microns, several microns, and is actually then released back into the space via some windows out in the near infrared. So you have UV, visible, near infrared, infrared, and they break it up. Everybody has different names for it, but it basically is covering a range of about 285 nanometers wavelength, clear out to several microns in wavelength.
Yeah.
That's sunlight.
And if we split all of that up as percentages, what percent of what comes through to us is UVA, UVB? What percent is visible? Can we split it like that so we've got a rough idea what's visible in terms of the spectrum we get?
Well, you can, and most people will go and they do what they call ASTM 1.5, which is essentially the direct sunlight on the surface of the earth. And everybody says, okay, well, that 50% visible, 50% near infrared. But that's not what actually happens. What happens is that the sunlight is coming in, it's scattering off of the atmosphere in the blues and the violets and the infrared, the UV. But then what happens is that it comes down, and plants were here first. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the plants have taken, and if you walk outside and you look at the beautiful green tree, it has about a peak reflectivity of about 20%. So it grabs red and blue, and through some amazing optical structures, selectively it takes that out, uses that to survive. It rejects the other wavelengths. So it's
Right.
like you put on a pair of sunglasses when you walk outside. From the standpoint of the visible portion that we see with our eyes is greatly attenuated. Like I say, 80% of it is absorbed in the trees. They're using it in various ways. But the near infrared, if you go and do near infrared photography, you see that the trees are bright white.
Yeah, they're
So
like
if
illuminated.
yeah, they're all covered with snow, grass, even dirt has a higher reflectivity in the near infrared than it does in the visible.
Right.
So what we our environment that we are attuned to or have evolved in is essentially using the portions of the spectrum that plants aren't using as much, and it's shifted the entire solar spectrum into the near infrared and infrared portion significantly. So that instead, when you're sitting in direct sunlight, you might have in optical watts terms, you have a near infrared or a visible to near infrared ratio about 1 to 1. When you go outside and you're in the forest and doing your wonderful walk, it shifts the optical power up to 3 or 4 times that relative to the visible portion. Now it's
Wow.
dropping the entire level as you're walking in the shade. But as Bob says, Newton didn't discover gravity because an apple fell on his head. It was because he was sitting under a shade tree.
Yeah.
Because what you're seeing is that there's an advantage to being outdoors
Yeah.
because the near infrared component and the infrared component are being used by the body to help deal with the higher the higher energy UV invisible and high energy visible portions of the spectrum, because those short wavelengths are capable of cracking basically any molecular bond in a random fashion. The body could not basically survive, or predict where that was going to occur. So it has all these other mechanisms that are trying to fight that issue. And it's just, to me, is just really interesting how the spectrum, what people like to talk about, 50% of it in the near infrared, 50% invisible, or 38 or whatever, it has nothing to do with what we really get when we're outdoors, because our surroundings are the main source of the energy. You're walking around vertically and
Yeah.
sunlight's hitting the top of your head. It hits the top of your head, your shoulders, maybe a little bit down your calves. But imagine that you've got all this trees and
Hmm.
grass and dirt around you that is preferentially kicking near infrared into you from all directions. And as Bob shows, it doesn't even matter if you got clothes on, you know,
Yeah.
for a large portion of the wavelengths, it's basically coming through. And so that's the true environment, the light environment that we are adapted to. And, I'll make a simple comment. Blue gets a lot of bad raps nowadays. It's blue
Yeah.
blockers and all this other stuff. I don't disagree, because, that's not the blue. If you go outside and you look at this in this beautiful blue sky, you're never exposed to those blue photons without an excess of near infrared coming
Yeah.
in, which is then approving ATP, enhancing your immune system, doing all this other stuff. That's what we threw away.
Yeah. The
We threw,
balance.
yeah, it's the ratios that matter, because, I mean, think about it in just simple terms, Yeah, if you have a control system, my engineer coming in, you have control systems, you want to keep it within a range. And it's amazing how well the body keeps things within a range as far as your temperature, your blood pressure, all these things. But it takes usually two opposing, they call them antagonistic hormones, like insulin and glucagon, melatonin and cortisol. They actually are used to maintain a balance. Now what happens? The biggest energy source into the body is sunlight, has been for millions of years, almost 30 megajoules per day. If all of a sudden you shift that in its spectral content, then
Yeah.
you're going to throw things out of balance. And so that's what you start to see more and more of, especially in the optical aspects. Okay, this wavelength range is localized here, this wavelength range is localized there, and they work against each other. The eye is amazing imaging optic. The light goes through, everybody thinks about the light that's going through your pupil. But the majority of photons that actually go onto your retina actually are not coming through the pupil. They're going through your eyelids and the sclera itself, because in the near infrared, that has reasonable transmission, and your eye lobe is huge compared to the pupil.
Yeah.
So you get this increase in the amount of near infrared in the one region that has the highest blood flow and need for blood flow in the body. So it's optically designed to be great imaging optic, but we call the other a non-imaging optic. And you can actually go look at some solar cell designs that mimic the eye for various reasons, but it's basically setting up a condition where you're always trying to force more near infrared relative to the visible. And it does it in very controlled proportions, and which is absolutely amazing to me.
Yeah.
And does that. That the one constant that the body has is that there is always an excess of near infrared all the way from direct sunlight all the way down to moonlight. Because what happens is the sun reflects off the dirt that's in the moon. The moon shifts the spectrum slightly into the near infrared. You're always given that ratio. You've got 9 orders of magnitude of change in intensity, but the ratios are always there for the body to take advantage of. And I think that's what it's doing.
So even moonlight is not to be ignored.
Well, I mean, people think about dark. I mean, I'll throw this number out here just so that for perspective, but in direct sunlight, you're getting 10 to the 22 photons per day. Okay. At night, you're getting 10 to the 17th photons.
Wow.
Yeah. It doesn't go black. There's a lot. The old statement that there's a lot of room left at the bottom. Yeah, there's a lot of room left at the bottom. Right. Now, is it used the same way? Maybe not. But when I first started doing this work, I was lucky enough to run it. One should put up a paper about some work by Zostro, where they looked at how many free radicals. Now, free radicals, people think of them being bad, but they're some bad, some good. But the bottom line is that, he did this set of experiments where he actually took skin, exposed it to different wavelengths, and measured the reactive oxygen species being generated in the skin. What he found is that in the UV, if you take a piece of skin, in the UV, there were equal amounts of reactive oxygen species being in those UV wavelengths, but there was also an equal amount being done in the visible. And if you do the optics and you do a bunch of stuff, you see how the body is has to be doing something to deal with all these reactive oxygen species. And that's what Glenn Jeffries and all these others are starting to show is that the longer wavelengths, which makes up the majority when we're outdoors, are actually controlling and making that ROS helpful, not hurtful.
Yeah.
And, if without it, we tend to start screwing around. But, one of the things, they shut down all the work in that area because what it showed is that if you wanted to if you really were concerned about reactive oxygen species in the skin, then you had to deal with not only the UV, but you also had to deal with the visible portion. Well, the only solution to that is to put everybody in blackface, which is socially unacceptable.
You don't get away with that anymore.
Yeah, well, but some companies have been trying to put some kind of coloration in there because the reality is someone with dark skin has almost no probability of getting certain skin cancers. And that's what you need to mimic if you want to solve the problem.
If you really want to get to the
you
need a full block.
Yeah, you need a full block, and the problem is that what they did is almost worse because what they do with all this SPF makeup is that they block the UV. Well, the UV portion, particularly UVA, is what actually is the alarm system that tells you that you're going to get a sunburn.
Yeah, enough. Get away, get out of the sun, find the shade. Yeah. You don't get that message, so you overdose on everything else.
Yeah, everybody goes out and spends a bunch of time frying under the visible portion, which is generating a lot of reactive oxygen species. But like I say, they can't deal with it. But now you've got all this makeup that has SPF in it.
Yeah.
So for someone who has very dark skin, it's actually setting them up because they're struggling to generate enough vitamin D in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as you start to play around with these numbers, and I guess that's the bottom line to your thing, the solar spectrum is not go measure the sun. The solar spectrum is what happens in our surroundings.
Yeah.
And what we've done now is we've moved everybody indoors, put UV and near infrared blocking glass windows for
Yeah.
low E glass. We've got all our light sources, all our displays are just visible only. And my concern, my biggest thing is I believe that based on what we've been looking at, is that we're really setting up this generation to be a bunch of cortisol addicts, you know,
Yeah.
from the standpoint of those shorter wavelengths tend to generate high levels of cortisol. When you walk into a casino, what do you see? You see a bunch of flashing lights, a bunch of noise, give you alcohol, all this kind of stuff. Because why? Because they know, absolutely know, that that enhances your ability to be more risk taking, which is associated with an elevated cortisol level. And unfortunately, the counter to cortisol is melatonin, and we're doing everything possible to squelch melatonin, both in our cells and in the pineal gland, that it's causing, as I said, an imbalance. And that's cortisol is important, but if you keep it up high, you can generate a lot of problems. And I'm
Yeah.
concerned that that's what's. I mean, I have a 1-year-old granddaughter. All you have to do is walk by a TV, and she locks into it. So
Yeah.
we can't turn off all our TVs when she's around. And you know, these companies know this. I
They
mean,
do.
they're doing this on purpose.
Yeah, it's true.
And that's really the shame about the whole thing. So
So underneath all of that, because there's a lot to unpack there, but um, we we shouldn't be afraid of the sun in
right.
terms of how we live. So, as an example, I can give you, which no doubt will come to your beautiful granddaughter in very soon, when she starts school. You'll get the instructions of it's a sunny day. Please pack the sun cream for the kids, kind of thing. And honestly, I'm like, nope, nope. Um, should we be perhaps not that, because the sunscreens are just the same as you've mentioned with the makeup. They allow you an overdose of everything without actually getting any kind of tan going. So you don't get the warning sign. I've spent my last 20 years of my career, telling patients not to take an anti-inflammatory drug when they've got an inflammatory problem like a sprained ankle, because the sprained ankle, the inflammation is fixing you. It's a
Mm-hmm.
healing process. It causes pain to stop you doing more harm. So if you cover all that up, you end up 20 years down the line with a smashed to pieces ankle with arthritis and your knee and your hip, and away we go. And this is what sun cream's doing. It's covering up the warning signs that the body actually is capable of giving you, saying, right, enough sun now. Skin's just beginning to change. For God's sake, sit in the shade or put a hat on or do something, but
Yeah.
live in fear of it.
No, I mean that you're 100% right, and nobody would advocate. Unfortunately, they're linking two very different situations. One where you go to the beach, you lay out on the beach, and you fry yourself 1 week a year or 2 weeks a year or
Yeah.
whatever. Versus, you're outside. I come from a bunch of dairy farmers.
All right.
Grandpa had a straw hat. I measured a straw hat, and it was amazing when you look at the near infrared transmission through that straw hat
Wow.
relative to the visible. Same with he wear a cotton shirt, long sleeve, and he spent his entire life out. Smart attack into his 90s.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that if you look at what optically, I mean, I'll do this one because I think it's really cool. If you think about, and this is what Bob does. I don't know if you've seen the picture of Bob's that with 850 nanometers going through the hand.
No, I heard him talk about it, but I've not seen it yet.
Yeah, you should look at it. But what basically happens is that the skull and the brain, there's a it blocks the UV and the near infrared from penetrating into the brain, but it transmits the near infrared component in particular. Not only that, the peak transmission characteristics of the cerebrospinal fluid is 850 nanometers, well into the near infrared. So it acts in our world like a light guide and funnels the near infrared down into the fissures of the brain, which the gray matter is all positioned almost perfectly to be accepting this. So people need to think about it, instead of being something to fear, it's actually a nutrient. It's something they should actually pursue on a regular basis. And most of the responses that you see biologically have a 10 to 20-minute response time, time constant. So
Yeah.
that can kind of give you an idea. You can't really just go out and get a little bit for 10 minutes or 20 minutes and then go away. It's kind of needs to be a constant refresh, you know, where you're getting it on, and you're what you. I guess I turn it around and say, what you really don't want is, you really don't want to do what we're doing, which is put people in 8 hours into a room that has nothing,
Yeah.
and then expect them to catch up on it. Because, everybody says, well, we spend 93% of our time indoors. Well, you spend the 93% at the best time to get some sun. you
Yeah.
know by the
Yeah.
time you get off, go to work, it's some portion is kind of dark, and when you come home, it's getting dark. And it used to be, in the old days, we had, you know, you may have stayed at work under fluorescence, but you came home and you read a book under incandescence, which had a
Yeah.
lot of near infrared knowledge. But just in general, the body assumes that it's exposed on a continuous basis to some level of predominantly near infrared exposure, when you're walking outdoors. Now we've
Yeah.
switched all that, and it's causing, I think, some significant problems for some people. Not everybody it bothers, but our products, when we put them out there, the response tends to be that children respond nicely to them. I did the optics. If you look at it optically, it should make sense, because children are smaller, so a higher percentage of their cells, if you have a fixed penetration depth of the light, a higher percentage of their cells are being engaged, exposed to near infrared, than
Yeah.
someone who's an adult. And, white males are the worst at the whole thing. They think nothing, we can do anything. So, but, but,
Yeah.
I'm arguing that a lot of the grouchiness and neurological, they did this really interesting study where they took a look at people with schizophrenia and clinical depression. And at midnight, they measured their melatonin to cortisol levels and then compared that to a control. There was a 5x increase in our decrease in the melatonin to cortisol ratio in the people that had these clinical depressions and things of that nature. And
Wow.
which is to me should be like big warning bells to everybody that,
Yeah.
hey, you're starting to screw around with these things, because it's not just physiological. It may very well be neurological. And
Yeah.
some of the crabbiness that we've got going on nowadays may be associated with it. They've just got their hormones out of whack and they just don't know it. So,
See, the thing with that is, I from a health point of view, I find that exciting as well. It's sad but exciting, because suddenly you see this problem and you go, right, this is so out of whack, the balance that they should have, and yet we know how they can get that balance back without anything particularly difficult to do.
yeah. And I think that, one of the things that Bob and Glenn are spending some time doing is talking to some architects. And, it's time for us to have a shift in the whole thing. The DOE got its shot. It failed. Honestly, it
Yeah,
failed miserably. We have more light pollution than we've ever had.
it's
We've
so
got
bad.
we've got the astronauts sitting up there for 6 months to a year exposed to LEDs, and they're coming back with mitochondrial damage. They got same thing going on in submariners. They got problems with the stealth boats that they took all the portholes out. And now they're having people get 60 days. They're having issues. We got night shifts people. There's so many opportunities to affect huge, I mean, absolutely huge portions of the population.
Yeah,
And do we understand it all? No, we do not. But I can guarantee you this, putting it back, I mean, they took it away with no research whatsoever. I was there.
yeah.
They didn't even bother to look.
They weren't even thinking about it, were they? Not in
No,
any way, not about human health.
No, I mean, if you look at lighting and displays and all that, it's all about your eye. Well,
Yeah,
what about everything else?
that's a camera. It's just a camera. That's all it is.
That's all it is. And they were wrong.
Yeah.
They are 100% wrong. And now the question is what we do. And one of
Mm.
the things I'm fighting right now is the DOE has now introduced some rule changes that essentially institutionalizes zero near infrared inside the homes, by mandating. And it's even more insidious than that. They're going after the old Edison screw-in bulbs.
Yeah.
Well, which population is more likely to have Edison screw-in bulbs? The poor and the black
Yeah.
population.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so they're literally targeting and discriminating against certain portions of the population that need the help the most.
When do we
And
get our first lawsuit?
yeah,
To
I did a paper with or an article with Professor John Louis, and John Louis is down in Miami. And he's from Haiti, and he's been trying to get into the black population to explain to them the need to get out and get sun, because
mm,
I mean they went through a forced migration to high latitudes, Chicago. Look at the problems in Chicago. If I could just change just the itsy bits of that, one of the few more, by getting them to understand that they may be being set up, with this whole thing.
yeah.
That because how can you blame somebody when there's a physiological or neurological effect that we don't, we can't guarantee isn't causing some of the problem?
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's interesting when you look at things like in Europe, you look at the map of where the redheads are in Europe, and the very, very fair-skinned. I'm sure it's the same, and it's the further north you go. So you head into Scotland and northern Scandinavia and into Iceland, and they're whiter skin, bluer eyes, red hair. And there's a reason for that. And there's a reason you start to head towards the equator, you get darker skin. So
yeah.
if you put darker skin in the north, then they're at a disadvantage almost.
Well, and it's no different if I go down to the equator, I'm
Yeah,
going to toast like a
you're at a
tree.
disadvantage.
I'm at a disadvantage. And that
Yeah.
doesn't make somebody wrong or better or worse or
No.
whatever. It's just, I mean, that's what the beauty of looking at from an optics standpoint. I have a friend, Justice, that, he's got 43% melanin, you know, and then compare him to someone like another friend that's, as you said, redhead, well, fair as fair can be. There's a 4x difference in their absorption characteristics, or the amount of photons that get into the body between those two people.
Yeah.
And we know that it's doing all this, as Glenn's showing and others are showing. I mean, the explosion in red light therapy, which kind of ticks me off in some ways, but
Why?
because I think they're going to set us all up for failure from the standpoint of, you know, if you, unless, I'll put it this way.
Got a red light torch here.
I know. But here's my problem. My problem is that the everything in nature is in proportions. There is no such thing as narrow band emitters in nature. They just don't exist.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when I am looking at the sun, there's only one sun, number one. Number two, I can immediately am forced to glance away. Okay. Then, fortunately, with a lot of the red light panels, they expose the person to the emitter directly. There is no glance away response. So and we have this terrible tendency, if as little's good, the lot's better. And I'm just afraid that they're going to hurt some people if they're not careful.
Right.
And, and now I'm not saying it doesn't work. I think it does work. It does do something.
Yeah.
But you're now throwing another imbalance into the mix.
Yeah.
It may solve something for, that's one of the things that always got me. If you look at all the, not only the lighting, but also the red PBM type stuff, they never keep track of what happens to the person when they get done with the therapy 20-minute session. You walk outside, go into a dark cave. What'd you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
And if you look at the basic, you know, the exposure levels, the dosages, walk outside, put a hat on, walk outside. You're going to get about the same thing, and you're going to get other things too.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Jack Cruz, it always says his acronym is TINA. There is no alternative to the sun.
Well,
To the
I think
sun.
he's probably right. Never met the man, but he's got some interesting viewpoints, I think.
Oh, he's pretty ferocious from what I hear, but he's, he blows my mind when I listen to him. But some of the stuff he comes out with is amazing. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Um,
it's a process of learning. It's like right now I'm spending a lot of time trying to do what we call um, measuring periodic structures, because what happens is the body. Everybody thinks about you look at a blue jay's wing, or you look at any of a lot of the colors that we see in nature that are fairly narrow. They're actually not generated by chromophores or absorption. They're generated by periodic structures, where the body uses water and lipids to essentially generate a small refractive index difference, but they do that on a period with regular spacing. And all of a sudden, they're able to redirect light one way or the other. And
yeah,
it's just, you know, it's been fascinating to look at. And I guess I'm just saying is that so many of the things that people are poo-pooing, like aura and things of that nature, grounding and all that. There really is a little bit of, when you look at like some person who has very dark skin, a lot of people will say, I see a kind of a blue tinge around them. It's a normal, they see that on. Well, it turns out that the periodic structure on the outside of the skin is acting very much like a blue jay's wing, and kicking a little bit of blue, making kind of like a sparkle of blue off of it.
wow,
People, and so it's tied to physics. It's the
yeah,
physics.
yeah,
In
yeah,
you look at what happens in the near infrared, you have a similar effect, or in the deep red, where if you have the right colored glasses on, it appears like, wow, that person seems a little bright compared to. Well, it's because the red edge is coming in, and this blue is coming in from the periodic structure on the skin, and you actually see it.
yeah,
And it's when you think about it, the nature is capable of generating periodic structures, or structures that modify direction and intensity of light in a way that I could not even dream of making right now. It
yeah.
is so far ahead of us that it's crazy.
There's an
And
intelligence in there that we just can't get near, can we?
no, I mean we can't even make the structures, let alone do it with a biology thought in mind. And that's yeah, that's where I come from, at least. I mean, if
Yeah,
you can do all this PBM stuff, and I don't, if it makes you feel better, go for it. Asana, I'd love Asana, but I don't have
yeah,
it. Things like that. but
hmm
but there's just so much more going on than almost every. We do a reductionist type approach with all of science. They're always trying to get down to one little thing that they check,
yeah,
and they're ignoring the fact that there's all this other stuff. I mean, there's thousands of simultaneous equations going on in the body
yeah.
at any given
In a
time.
fraction of a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and to generate survival, health, things of that nature. So
So when it comes back down to it, all of this drives us all the way back round to um, getting outside. And it is that simple in the end, isn't it? But for example, watching the sunrise, or being out in the early morning, what happens if you see the sun, right? And the sun's coming up. What happens if it's cloudy and you're out in it? Does that create a problem? Does that matter? Should you on a cloudy day be outside? Is daylight different to sunlight?
I would say, if anything, clouds and our surroundings tend to enhance be a more optimum situation.
Okay.
You know, I mean, the real crux of the problem here is that we have created these artificial environments that are so afield from what, the difference between a shiny full sun day and a cloudy day. It's just, you know, it's still providing you with a lot of
It
the near
doesn't really
infrared.
matter.
It doesn't matter. What matters is that in so many positions, so many population groups, they are put in an environment where there's not trees. There's nowhere for them to go and get outside,
Yeah,
and that's what I think the architects are really starting to move towards, where you start to see them talking about people per cubic or per square foot versus the foliage and canopy levels. I mean, there are some really good people doing work in that area.
yeah,
But if you look at like the black populations in certain urban areas, they have less trees by definition than
yeah.
other people do and less access to those things.
Wow.
And, and then we come on top of everything else. There was this really stupid approach in New York City where they were having trouble with crime at the in the various parks. So what they do? They ran up, got these big generators, put lights up on poles, LED lighting, and they
Right.
flooded the thing. Not only did they flood it with all kinds of bad energy or photons, they also made a ton of noise and pollution off
Yeah,
the diesel generators that
yeah,
were running it. I mean, that's you mentioned early on. It's there needs to be a change in mentality. Sunlight is not bad. You just have to be smarter than to walk out and lay down and toast yourself.
yeah. Don't behave like you do on the like the Brits do on a for 50 weeks of the year, like you say, no sun. 2 weeks of the year, lie there, and actually probably also lying on a concrete by a pool with probably very few trees and anything around anyway,
Yeah,
and just burn. Well, actually, they don't burn the hell out of themselves. A lot of them because they cover up in sunscreen, so they're not even getting a full spectrum sunlight anyway.
yeah. And that's what I hope. What we're trying to do is we're trying to bring the near infrared back enough to where we can add back in some UVA and UVB, in
Yeah.
the indoor environment. I don't
Can
know
you?
if we can do that yet. It's
No.
kind of hard because people are very afraid of UV. They've been told it's going to give them skin cancer. Yet, if you look at most of the um, number of studies that have shown that your uh, longevity is actually much higher for people who spend time in the sun on a regular basis than people who don't.
Yeah. And
And
is there? Do you think there's a role? I know you probably. I don't know. Let's see what you say. Do you think there's a role for sunbeds? Say in the northern European country where it's dark or whatever. Is there any kind of role for UVA, UVB sunbeds?
I would say we're not to the point yet that we can actually know the interactions enough to do that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the studies are done by people who are trying to sell you a sunbed. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a businessman too. You're trying to sell a product, but I believe that science is not there yet to where you can actually determine that one way or the other on the
Yeah.
long term. That's
Yeah.
really the real problem. We're not talking about you're going to don't walk outside, you're going to die next day. What we're talking about is over the course of people's lives, are we
Yeah.
having these long term negative effects? Now, I don't particularly espouse to the beds from the standpoint of, again, they tend to be narrowband emitters. They tend to
Mm.
be short duration, high exposure levels, um, and that's just not what the body's expecting.
Yeah.
The body's expecting something over an extended period of time. Even in you walk out in this, just comparison. It's direct sunlight, say 100,000 lux. If you go into the shade, it drops down to 10,000 lux. You go into a house, it's 500 lux or 1,000 lux, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, those, but you think about that from the standpoint of 10 minutes outdoors versus 100 minutes outdoors versus 1,000 minutes. I mean, 100 minutes under the shade. You're all dealing with the same number of joules. It's time times power
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. Of course.
And So physics, from a physics standpoint, you know, I think that our real problem is we've taken the allowable time we have in a day and put us in an environment that's negatively affecting our physiological and
For
neurological
sure.
health.
And can we if it is you have a difficult environment where perhaps you can't get out to it's not as simple as just getting outside for somebody, which is very common now. Do we Can you help things by, for example, opening windows, putting plants inside your house? Does any of that make any effect on this or enhance if a window is open and you've got plants inside, are you helping the near infrared in your internal environment or not?
Yeah, I mean, one of my pet peeves is all the plant walls that they're putting into these skyscrapers to try
Yeah.
and make everybody healthy. But if you look at it optically, the whole point of the plants is to reflect the near infrared. Well, if you
Yeah.
blocked all the near infrared by putting up this glass
The
that
windows.
blocks in the windows, then what's the point of the plant? I'm not saying the plant isn't going to give you some benefit. It is, but it's not doing what you see in the same thing as you're seeing when you're walking outside. Those
No.
plants that are outside are kicking tons of near infrared into your body. And, but yes, I mean, you can open a window. We're working on some work in that area to kind of be able. One of the problems is people can't see it, the near infrared. So we're trying to provide some metering to where you can actually see that. Hey, you open the window, X. You close the window, Y. You know,
Wow.
and that's it's pretty simple right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Type mentality, but that's what needs to happen because you know women tend to be a lot more in tune to it, what we're talking about. A, because they think about their children, but B, I think they also are optically different. Women have thinner skin, less collagen, more of the light penetrates into it deeper than white males. And, so to think that the body that we have over all these millions of years adapted such little changes. Someone with dark skin has slightly larger cells, a little more thickness to it. They sweat a little bit different than that. All those are adaptations to enhance their ability to survive in the lower latitudes. Higher latitudes shifted. We moved away from melanin. We have a little thinner skin. We have a higher level of fat, which tends to localize, to have change the optical effect that we get. So, I mean, understanding all those different little nuances is what I think is really the most important thing to do because the body made a choice. It could have gone the other way,
Mm.
and it didn't based on its environment. And we need to understand all of those environmental effects. But right now, it's like we came in with a sledgehammer and just smacked the heck out of the entire thing by making it so that most people, and there are a lot of people who can't get out either for safety reasons or health reasons or whatever. And you know, it's clear that we can make an improvement by doing certain things. I mean, there's studies that have shown that a patient near a window versus a patient away from a window has a higher probability of health. Adding some near infrared over a short period of time can make a big difference in how they. Roger Seaholt's done a number of videos around our work, and he's the one that took one of his COVID patients out into the sunlight. And the guy said, this is not, why are we doing this? He said, okay, I'll go do it. He said, Doc, I felt so much better after I came back in 20 minutes. I
Yeah.
mean, that yet we set up exactly the opposite environment in
Yeah.
our hospitals, in our schools, and then we wonder, why is it the kids aren't learning well? Why is it, this is not rocket science. I mean,
Yeah.
all we're doing is putting back what's been the body's been expecting for a million years, and then we're surprised that there's a benefit. you
Yeah.
know that's the part that's frustrating.
I mean, and some of it we've lost only very recently, really, because even you look at some of the old hospitals, but not that long ago, they had sunrooms, and they would put sick patients out on the veranda, um,
Well, I mean,
exposed to sun.
yeah, Florence Nightingale was an amazing nurse, but she was even more amazing statistician. She went and took all these observational things and said,
Hmm.
hey, if you do just these things, there's a hospital, the old hospital at Ellis Island was really one of the last pavilion hospitals that was out there. But if you
Right.
look at that hospital, it had the floor was the passive heating, windows were left open all year round.
Wow.
The operations that they did were sitting up on top of the roof under conservatory glass with no blocking lights, mostly open. And, the doctors and their families lived with the patients that they were treating.
Amazing.
And yet what happened? We got into antibiotics and all this other stuff. We started to try, and the dollar got involved. And now you have these very closed environments. I mean, one of the things, this will probably get me in trouble, but one of the things that is going on now, every time you turn around, it's like I keep on saying light, 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 light. Oh, well, let's go talk about circadian. Oh, well, let's go talk about air exchanges. Oh, let's go talk. They get in the way of, let's talk about light for a little bit.
Yeah.
But, this new thing that they got going about trying to reduce particle count and air exchanges in buildings and all this other stuff, they don't get it. The point is that in nature, one of the things that I found was absolutely fascinating is that in the morning, sunlight comes up. What does it do? It starts to increase the amount of hydrogen peroxide and ozone on the surface of the earth. Okay. And so by afternoon, we have germicidal levels of hydrogen peroxide and ozone in the air we breathe. Okay.
Wow.
Then it drops down in the evening, it goes away. What happens? All the microbes that have been absorbing energy throughout the day start to do respiration and kick out nitric oxide, another germicide, and actually a good way to knock yourself out and go to sleep. So, the body the sun is generating these other things in our environment. Now, what do? We say, oh, we're going to take and we're going to put in 100 or 20 or 12 or 24 air exchanges through all these filtering systems, get rid of all this stuff. One of the things I saw when I was doing during COVID is that if you look at it, we actually created for the first time a biannual uh, spike in deaths. But what had occurred was very localized. During the first phase of the pandemic, we had everything, the typical time thing in March or whatever
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
timing that worked out, that the seasonality. And I wrote a
that's
paper.
right.
I wrote a paper on this and published it. But basically, you have seasonality.
Yeah.
But by the time you hit summer, and the CDC, I actually had a guy there that he said if we could ever figure out what causes seasonality, it'd be more effective than any vaccine. Well, what happened? In the first phase of COVID, before we got into all the other stuff and the
Yeah.
vaccinations,
Yeah.
you could see that in Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, and Arizona, there was a spike in COVID in the summertime. The same time over in Italy, they saw no spike. Well, if you look at it, what does air conditioning do? It strips out any of the reactive oxygen species in the environment. So we basically created an environment and put people in these because air conditioning, 90% of the air conditioning at that particular point in time was in the US.
Yeah.
So we keep doing these things that's
Yeah.
screwing around with what nature's been trying to take care of us. Because you think about it, the body couldn't depend on Lilly or Pfizer or whatever to generate a vaccine for millions of years. So part of the balance is sunlight generating reactive oxygen species. And we did some computational fluid dynamics studies, and you could actually see how different particles respond to moving through an atmosphere containing even minute amounts of hydrogen peroxide. It deactivated the virus. It is the
Yeah.
most effective way to deactivate it. Now, what are we doing? We're creating these environments where we're going to get rid of every germ that ever existed. We're going to
Yeah.
make it
Yeah.
sterile. And you're kind of looking at it and saying, but that's not how it works.
No, that's dead. Sterile means dead. It's
Yeah,
finished. Good
yeah.
night.
But can you get anybody to think about it? No, it's really hard because sunlight, for whatever reason, sunlight is last on the list,
Yeah.
and I don't know why, but
No,
it
well,
is.
like it's people are obsessed with things like germs and stuff like that, and viruses. And I'll be sat at a cafe having a coffee or something, and someone will leave the table next to me, and suddenly the waitress comes along with the spray and assaults the whole place with this Christ knows what's in it.
Yeah.
That thing, the stink of it. I'm like, I was enjoying my coffee till you did, as if humans have never been able to survive with just surfaces as they are. It's
Well, and,
bizarre.
and the data was so stinking clear. I mean, I tried to, through the NIAID and Fauci's group, they did some really great studies where they showed that the virus half life was in cool, dark environments can be days. But the minute you introduce sunlight
Yeah,
or you introduce these reactive oxygen species, half life drops down to about 18 seconds or less.
yeah.
And
Wow.
so the point being is that when you think about how 99% of all infections for COVID occurred indoors, almost nothing that they've ever been able to find occurred outdoors.
Yeah,
Why is it that the black population, African American population, were 40 times more likely to die of COVID than a sub Saharan African person with no vaccine, with
yeah,
no decent health care? Same goes true with a lot of they thought there was going to be this huge spread within the homeless. Then we
didn't
didn't see
didn't
it.
didn't happen.
you
No.
know and but it's pure physics, but it's being driven by sunlight. And it there's just it to me, it's like we keep on trying to ignore what actually has worked for millions of years. And
Yeah,
in fact, we don't just ignore it, we flip it and do exactly the opposite.
yeah, it seems that way. Now, since we don't really have a dosage per day that we understand is optimal rather, I'm guessing with sunlight, we don't have that to hand. It must be argued, I guess, that zero sunlight is bad. Some sunlight is better, and plenty of sunlight has got to be good. Yeah, am I right?
Well, yeah, but there there was um, there was a study done in uh, New York, where they looked at a bunch of people 70 years and older, and they correlated their those that had some form of skin non-melanoma skin cancer uh, were 80% more or less likely to have dementia than those who had never had some level of skin cancer.
Wow.
And, and you know that there's also the study out of Sweden where they showed that longevity was linked to people that had spent a significant amount of time outdoors. I come from a farming family. You know, dementia and Alzheimer's never occurred. You
No,
know,
no.
and is it processed food? Is it whatever? It's probably all the above. But I'm just trying to get sunlight to get on the list.
Yeah, sunlight is a big part of the list. What can people do in their own homes, in their own internal environments, to mitigate any of this? Is there anything they can do?
Well, um, as you said, if you open the window and have a screen, most of the based on the DOE's requirements mandates, they are blocking all the near infrared from coming into under these low E glass windows. So having some area, and this is what I would love to see, especially within elderly care, is that either if you get them outdoors or put in a greenhouse that has glass, just simple glass, or polycarbonate, or acrylic, or whatever. Those have transmissions out to 2 or 3 microns. so that that allows you to get some access to it, and take the time to do that a couple times a day, or one
Yeah.
even. I mean, there was a horrific study that showed that the average person in a nursing home gets about 5 minutes per month of direct sunlight. And
Wow.
because I mean, it's a hassle. It's like Roger was doing when he took the patient out. He had to take the oxygen tanks. He had to take all this other stuff out for this guy. And but what the benefit was is there were 5 people standing around outdoors with the guy that were taking care of it. Because I
Yeah.
think that people, one of the things that I think is really most fascinating is I did the studies on the deactivation of COVID over, and what these were short range studies where you're 6 people 6 feet apart.
Yeah.
Okay, so the bottom line is that that then led to the idea that, okay, I could deactivate the majority of the based on the models. And what we did is we used data from based on some of the work done by what's his name? I'm thinking about it later.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, we were able to put in these deactivation coefficients into the model. So what we'd have is have somebody cough, and you'd see we'd had 3 distributions of droplet size from half a tenth of a micron down to 100 microns or whatever the thing was. And what you saw is that as the particle moves through the atmosphere, the biggest effect was these reactive oxygen species on deactivating, because it's a surface area to volume ratio. So the smaller aerosols deactivated faster than the bigger droplets. It all kind of started to make sense.
Yeah.
But what also showed is that it's really hard. You still can get some percentage transfer, and sunlight was used as also into the mix, based on this work, like I said, that they did at DHS. But what it clearly was going on is that what wasn't being taken into account is the effect of sunlight on the body of the person ejecting the virus and the person accepting the virus.
Mm-hmm.
It's very clear to me that one of the big roles for sunlight is to actually create barriers for pathogens to come in. Because if you go into the longer wavelengths, strangely, but if you do the model, you'll see the highest density of photons, not energy, but photons in the human body occurs in the longer wavelengths that everybody says, oh, that's just nothing. It doesn't do anything. But what happens is, because water absorbs so strongly in those outer parts, the outer part of your skin is absorbing almost all the photons in a very narrow layer.
Yeah.
And that appears what's going on is that is actually generating a reactive oxygen, hydrogen peroxide and others, in the outer part of the skin that acts as a barrier to pathogens coming in. So the system is amazing. And then you
Yeah.
even go further. There was this work by Yakimov where he showed that up in the UVB region, he actually measured the melanin and found that it was oxidized. Now, it's really hard to oxidize melanin using photons, but it's not. It's extremely easy to oxidize melanin if you throw hydrogen peroxide in. So it's a photochemical effect. Well, I just generated a whole bunch of hydrogen peroxide in the 50 microns used by the UVB simultaneously. So what you literally get is an enhancement, and it's about a 5x enhancement in the efficiency of breaking down cholesterol into what we use for vitamin D
Yeah.
and all these other things. So again, it's the elegance of the body and how it's using different portions of the spectrum to enhance our survivability. And when you start talking about enhancing the ability, everybody has there's a global vitamin D shortage. Well, I would argue it's a global vitamin D shortage because you took out sunlight from the
Yeah.
equation. But it's not just about the UVB, it's about the other parts of the spectrum, because literally you're looking at almost every hormone that you can think of in that outer 50 microns being its source being the efficiency of that conversion. And
Yeah.
we know for a fact that you're looking at less than 8% efficiency under good conditions as far as oxidation of that cholesterol. And, we also know for a fact that the skin is capable at this point of generating everything de novo, where it literally can convert that oxidized cholesterol all the way into various forms of vitamin D, into sex hormones, into all these different things. So we're screwing around with
Yeah.
the basic source that feeds all these other things simply by not getting all the spectrum.
Yeah, our skin, as is the rest of us, is craving this. It's craving sunlight, and because the standard thing is, oh, your skin's just a protective barrier kind of thing. Uh, it would appear it's a factory, in fact.
Oh, it's a huge, and you think about, you know, people who say it's just a barrier, yet how do we get the stuff we do for vitamin D? How do we, and there's a there's one paper that claims that there's a 600-fold higher level of hydrogen peroxide in the interstitial fluid than within the cells themselves. And that is, as we age, we clearly know that, you know, look at your beard, look at my whatever little bit of hair I've got, graying occurs. Why? Because the ability of those cells to, this is my hypothesis, the ability of
Mhm.
those cells to actually maintain the reactive oxygen, the hydrogen peroxide gradient starts to degrade. So then, therefore, we start to gray. We have higher levels of, more damage being done by the hydrogen because the body's made a trade off, is what I think.
Yeah,
I know I got trillions and trillions and trillions of pathogens coming at my body constantly. How do I protect myself? Trees, they have all kinds of layers that they use and all kinds of chemicals that they use to try, you know, a healthy tree won't, there was this really cool thing where they looked at bugs actually pick out the leaves and that are less healthy, because if they eat the healthy leaves, it makes them crazy and makes them sick. So there's a
wow.
chemical process involved in
Yeah,
protection. And
yeah,
I just think that you wrap that around and you say, okay, not only are we blocking the natural germicidal effects of the atmosphere, we're degrading the body's ability to fight it off or making it more likely to send to somebody.
yeah,
And, the absolute worst thing we could have done during COVID was put people indoors around each other in an environment that has essentially been stripped. And, you can do the calculation, but it doesn't take very many people to essentially deplete all the reactive oxygen species within a given volume.
yeah.
And, that's what we did.
We basically forced everyone. I mean, okay, so you've got some land, so you could wander around during lockdown. I've got a garden, and so on. But a lot of people don't have that. They have high-rise apartments or whatever it might be, and we made them malnourished, basically.
Yeah, I think so. And so, there's two components: the stripping out of the reactive oxygen species, and then the degradation of the body's ability to respond.
Yeah,
And I think the air conditioning bump that we saw down in those states
yeah,
clearly indicate that, because usually you would see, a spring seasonal flu, and then it would drop down to almost nothing in the summer. We didn't see that with COVID. We actually saw those places that had high levels of air conditioning literally had higher death rates than people who opened a window.
yeah. Yeah,
So,
right. It's really interesting because when I qualified as an osteopath, I did a year. My tutor was 96 years old and he was still working 5 days a week. And he used to talk about how he used to say, "You can't catch a cold. You can't catch a cold. I'm telling you now, you can't catch a cold." And then the explanation was, and it fits with the aircon thing. It was to do with the seasonal changes in humidity. So you'd go from a damp outside to a dry inside, possibly because of aircon, central heating, those kind of things. And it literally damages the lining of your respiratory tract. And to then cleanse itself with all the dead tissue from the damaged respiratory tract, you cough, you produce mucus, your body goes into a cleansing because of this. So I'm pretty certain the aircon uh, does us no favors at all. It's another one of those where we think we've come up with a good idea, and to be honest with you, if I lived in a really hot country, I'd be quite happy to have it. But uh, there is there is a trade off, isn't there?
There is. I mean, comfort wins in a lot of ways.
Yeah, comfort
But
wins what kills us.
yeah, but but you don't know the consequence until it's too late.
Yeah,
That's the
well,
problem.
that's clever humans for you.
Yeah, yeah.
We're always
Well,
meddling.
but I mean, your humidity stuff I just find really interesting because one of the things when I was doing the seasonality, there was a study done by Mayo where they increased the humidity within a classroom versus not.
Right.
And they saw a 50% reduction in illness associated with higher humidity. But what they didn't control in the experiment
Yeah.
is they were using tap water from to for the humidifiers. Well,
Okay.
in a lot of the white water treatment facilities, hydrogen peroxide and ozone is being used to essentially, purify the water.
Right. So they could have been
So
spraying that into the air without realizing it.
yeah, that
Interesting.
is one of the things. Professor Zare at Stanford has done a lot of work where he's shown that you know water, the conversion from water to hydrogen peroxide doesn't even really require much energy at all because the simple idea of atomization causes the increase in hydrogen peroxide levels within double distilled water. And he's got some really cool videos. But the point being is that, if you're depending on how you do humidity, you know, and it's crazy. I talked to some people about trying to get them to do this,
Yeah.
and their immediate response was, "You're putting a chemical in, it's going to kill everybody." Yet, almost every well water that has sulfur in it is using hydrogen peroxide to actually get rid of the smell and the taste
Yeah.
associated with the sulfur.
Yeah.
But whatever reason, the minute you try and actually control it and measure it, then you're going to kill everybody, type
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I don't think
And
so.
it's unfortunate because I mean, that's what we did. We used misters with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide throughout COVID.
Yeah.
Knock on wood, we didn't get sick.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, so we've got the sunlight bit, very, very important. And the more people can do to enhance their exposure to it and be sensible in it, of course, we're not advocating, you sit and stand and burn yourself to be not, it's not a pleasant thing being badly sunburned.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of it is nighttime and darkness because that's an important part of melatonin and the rhythms of the body. But at night, I suddenly had this thought: if you have one, like a standby light on your TV or something. Well, I don't have a TV in our bedroom, but like at night, can that disrupt just having little light here and there in a room? Should it be pitch black? Should we be obsessed about this with our bedrooms and stuff?
Um, um, I think the real problem is I call it the house of 1,000 suns. Um, what's happened is when we used to be in the old days with an incandescent,
Yeah,
very simple phase dimmer. You could dim this thing down to next to nothing, just this nice warm orange glow. I mean, candles around the bathtub, whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
It's a good thing. It's not
mm,
a bad thing.
yeah,
Problem is that that's not what you get nowadays. You get this blue spike, and then you get a yellow spike. And the real problem is for the majority of people, and even the high end of LED lighting used to be we have 100,000 to 1 dimming range where we could turn it down to this nice orange glow, like sitting around a campfire with coals of fire or whatever all
Yeah.
night,
Yeah.
you know? But that's not what we get with LEDs. They are lucky. Most of them don't dim. A good portion of them only dim to 10%.
Yeah.
And a very small fraction can dim down to 1,000. As I told you, there was 10 to the 22, 10 to the 17th. That's 9 orders of magnitude. That's like 0.001% dimming range. That's what nature does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like I say, sitting around a campfire at night, I used to do scouting and things of that nature.
Hmm.
It was great. The coals would, put out all kinds of nice orange, red, a lot of near infrared and infrared. I was also close to the ground, so I was getting the nitric oxide coming in. There's all kinds of things that are beneficial to a lifestyle that we used to have that we no longer have.
Yeah.
I personally believe that blue, they need to almost start designating two different blues. Blue of the sky is mostly near infrared and broadband.
Yeah.
Blue off of an LED is very narrow band, high peak intensity, and it's kind of like I was saying, glance away type. You don't have a very big response to blue in your eye, so it can have some pretty good spikes, and it's just annoying. Is what I think.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, um, we're not really talking apples to apples when people talk about, well, I got the TV on and or whatever, or the little standby light. Yeah, it probably doesn't do much, but it can be annoying if you wake up and you see that flash of light.
For sure it is.
I mean, I've got
I had to cover
I
them
got
up.
yeah, I got a smoke detector. It has this little thing that
Uh,
every once in a while it puts out a little beep. I
yeah.
like to throw the thing out the wall
Yeah. Absolutely.
because and this is kind of funny because Russ, his comment was is that all it. I don't do poo-poo circadian. I think it's there is a definite trend and people want to do it,
Yeah.
but it represents a very small part of the melatonin generated in the body. The majority of melatonin is generated not in the pineal gland, but is
Yeah.
generated in our cells, especially in our muscles. And we showed that pretty clearly in the paper I did with Russ from transient response. But I don't know. I guess I struggle with you're not comparing apples to apples when you're doing this because nature does not provide a narrow band emitter like we see in LEDs, and you cannot dim them down to the point to where they become insignificant because they don't. It's one of the quirks of LEDs. It's very hard to dim them down,
Yeah.
and that's why we developed our DC bulb. And we've developed a new driver that'll give you 100,000 to 1 dimming range. And I think that the most important problem is that our issue, and I have to give the night sky people kudos, is that unfortunately the standard response to any new technology that you make cheaper is to use more of it. And the what we've done to the outdoors, versus a campfire with nice glowing coals, we have these blaring bright, you know,
Yeah.
LED
They're
floodlights.
horrible things.
Yeah, they're horrible. I mean, I had a neighbor that she put this thing, it lit up half the neighborhood,
Yeah.
because she felt like she was going to be more secure. I thought, turn that off, and that's really the problem. Most users don't have the ability to turn them down.
No.
And now we've got all this stuff where we're going to do orange and red and all this.
Hmm.
Well, okay, you did red or you did orange. What's the lumens per watt of that? You're better off in some ways to go back and put a little fire candle up there, and gas it. It was gas to do the thing.
Yeah.
Princeton had the old beautiful lamps with the little flames and all
Yeah.
that for
Yeah. Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
You put in the LEDs and they're annoying. I mean, they look awful, and
You know,
it
I was 30 years old before I saw the Milky Way
yeah.
because of light pollution. And I remember I was in France on the coast, and I stepped out of the villa with a whiskey in my hand, and I looked up at the sky. Excuse my language now, and I just went, "Fuck." You know, that's why they call it the Milky Way. I had never seen it
Yeah,
until then, and nobody in this country's seen it.
and it's a shame because they've equated safety with lighting at night, and it's not true. It's
Mm,
simply not true. I
yeah,
mean, there are so many other ways that you do it, and now, especially now, if you have a little bit of near infrared contact, we can dim ours down to where you can't see the output with your eye.
right.
Yet it's got a near infrared component that all the most of the security cameras have a peak response at 900 nanometers in the silicon detectors. So, you know, turn it way down,
Yeah,
but illuminate the near infrared component and for security cameras if you want to. But either that or, like I say, I mean, and then what we're doing to insects is just one of the things that Bob did is he did some near infrared photography of insects. And you think a kid gets a lot of photons in. Insects are just like this. They're just every cell in their being is associated with it. And then there's little areas where it's a strong absorption. Okay, why is it absorbing there so
yeah,
strongly?
yeah,
And insects in particular, they are the masters of generating these photon or these periodic structures to
yeah.
do various things.
Mm,
They even actually are showing, I don't know if you've seen the new stuff with about passive daytime radiative cooling, but what they're finding
um,
is that they can literally these animals are connecting in the 8 to 15 micron regime. There's a transparent window, infrared transfer. They literally are using that to cool themselves to the point that they gather water out of the atmosphere.
wow.
And you're looking at this and you're going, we're dumber than bricks as
Yeah,
far as,
yeah,
understanding what's been going on for millions of years.
yeah,
And the plants are doing exactly the same thing. They're radiating up in this window to negative 40 degrees Celsius, which condenses the water. And that even in deserts, they are extracting water from the atmosphere
yeah.
using that radiative cooling.
Did you
So
see the Chinese research about the LED lights and insects and plants? The LED street lights, how they're stressing at night. The new LED street lights are stressing the plants that are underneath them to the point where the plant stress response is to thicken its leaves in defense,
yeah,
and so the insects can't eat the leaves and start to die. So we're stressing the plants and destroying biodiversity with these goddamned horrific streetlights. So that's
yeah.
one of the reasons. I'm sure there's more reasons, but it's one of the reasons you don't get the same splats on your car. Certainly not in this country that we used to from insects.
Oh yeah. I mean, growing up in the Midwest, you used to be you'd have to clean your windshield all the time. In fact, I worked at a gas station. And I had to clean those stupid windows. But so, but it's affecting pollination rates. I mean, we're just trying to do everything possible to screw up everything we can,
Yeah,
and it's all driven. Honestly, I'm all for green. I don't have a problem with green. I'm just sick and tired of it being used by people who don't have a clue what they're talking about.
yeah.
I mean,
So there's
this is this
a
is this is cutting edge science. I'm sorry, it
yeah,
really is.
yeah,
And having lightweights trying to tell everybody what to do is really getting old. And one thing I can tell you, I've spent my entire life working with researchers, and the very best in a field means that they're not very good in other fields. So
yeah.
you can't be the best in the world at something and not have it cut it down on your ability to understand other things because it's so stinking hard anymore. There's very few generalists left, and it frosts me that we're getting
Yeah.
these people pontificating about saving the planet when they're really causing a great amount of damage to the planet.
Causing
Anyway,
serious problems. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yesterday I stumbled across a very old article from a guy over here who's a highly respected botanist called David Bellamy, and he was amazing at explaining plants and nature and insects and the whole interplay of everything. And he happened to write one article that was published in one of the mainstream media about his thoughts on climate change and the natural cycles of climate change and the evidence and so on, and the why CO2 is so important for plant growth and so on. He wrote this one article, and I think it's maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, maybe. He's never been heard of since.
Yeah.
Cancelled because of an absolutely magnificent scientist and a brilliant character on TV, cancelled because of his opinion.
Well, all I get to say, the most amazing thing working with Glenn, Bob, and myself, we are about the most misfit group from anybody you could think of. You got an astrophysicist, you got a biologist, and you got an optical engineer. And that was what I ran into with Russ. Russ has got 40 years on melatonin, 100,000 citations. And I showed him what we were doing. I was doing on the optics side. And he said, Scott, you got to publish this. It took us multiple times. I actually got rejected so many times
Yeah,
because it didn't fit the norm. And like I say, with the Department of Energy, they are well aware of this. They
yeah,
were informed.
yeah. They know.
There were multiple people who put out various public, and they just drove it through with no semblance of intelligence whatsoever.
No.
And it's frustrating because if they get their way, they're basically are creating an environment that is toxic to the human race,
Yeah,
and that's the bottom line.
that is the bottom line. Yeah, unfortunately, it seems they are getting their way
Yeah, well,
now. For now.
for now,
But you say about being the team of misfits, but that's why you end up doing groundbreaking stuff, because you're all coming at it from different angles, from different backgrounds, and that sparks creativity.
yeah, well,
And
if
science is
nothing else,
creative.
it's a lot of fun. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Well,
you
that
you Brits have a great sense of humor, and I.
it can be a little bit brutal sometimes, but it's normally fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And but yeah, it's just such a, as you said earlier, it's such a huge opportunity if people would
Mm.
just look at it as that. I
Yeah.
mean,
I
how
mean,
we can.
I sorry, please carry on.
No, I was just saying, how can you ignore the opportunity to restore? I mean, that's all I'm talking about.
Yeah.
We're just
Yeah.
restoring what the processes and the mechanisms that the body adapted to live in our environment. I
Yeah.
mean, this artificial environment has a consequence, and it's not good.
No. I completely agree with that. And I lit up when I sort of stumbled across some of this research. My excitement levels went up because I suddenly realized, well, here are things that, even because some patients, they just want a magic pill to fix everything. They don't want to be involved in the effort. But when I saw that, hang on a minute, all I need to tell them here is expose yourselves to sunlight. And okay, it might not be the miracle cure, but you're putting back a foundation that should have been there, that has probably been lost. And you're right, grounding is part of that. Sunlight is part of it. Movement is part of it. These are simple things. And they even did research about movement and showed that they looked at some of the oldest, longest lived Greeks. And they found that they don't do formal exercise. They just potter around. They just don't do lots of sitting, but they do lots of pottering. And you don't have to do HIIT exercise classes and go to aerobics. Just give your body what it needs: sunlight. It needs light. It needs electricity from the ground and movement.
Yeah, and debating whether unfortunately people get upset about grounding and things like that. There's probably some underlying issue that we aren't quite understanding, because you're putting things in. When you go outside, you're doing things simultaneously.
Yeah,
You are exposing yourself to light, you're exposing yourself to all this gases or elements within the atmosphere, you're doing some exercise, you're walking around, and your feet have different characteristics than the rest of your body as far as
Yeah.
how they conduct moisture and things of that nature. There's just so many things. So poo-fooing one or the other, it's really just all about
Yeah.
getting out in nature.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
arguing against that is, I think, kind of like a fool's errand. And, for given all the amount of time and effort that people are spending in gyms, as you say, and all these different things, doing the simple thing of going out for a walk out in the park, you know, my concern is that, and why we're doing what we're doing is that there are people who can't.
Yeah.
And there also is this situation of, I believe what we've done is the opposite, and it's a negative. So it's causing harm.
Yeah.
So all we do with our stuff is we just try and put back a little bit more in balance. We say it's just simply a tool. You know, you can flip our switch and it goes from a nice daylight condition, still has 3 times the amount of near infrared to visible. And, then when you click the other way, it's 10 to 1. It's basically just the coals of a campfire type spectrum.
Yeah.
And I believe that is an honest assessment of what we do.
Yeah.
It's simple to do. It doesn't cost that much,
So this is the Naira, is that right? The Naira light bulbs?
Yeah. And
How's it been received, Scott?
we're doing good. We're
Yeah?
selling quite a bit. And
Can
now
you
we're
get the
coming out
voltage
with a
sorted,
version where you can plug into you guys is the 220.
please?
And and
Sooner rather than later. Come on.
we
I
yeah,
know someone who bought a couple. He lives on one of the Channel Islands over here called Guernsey, and it's the 220 volt. He bought them, plugged them in, boom. I was like,
yeah.
they were never gonna work.
Yeah, we try to explain people that. So
Yeah.
now what we have is we have essentially a little wall wart that converts from the 220 to 48 volts. Then we just use a little, and then you plug your lamp, whatever lamp you want, that takes a screw-in bulb. You plug it in, you flip the switch, and it goes. And the other thing, one of the things that I also found when I was looking at what nature really was, is I looked at the amount of flicker or the amount
Yeah.
of modulation that occurs in nature. And what you find, other than a rock slide or a tiger about ready to eat you, the frequency content, modulation content, is less than a hertz. Yet, if you look at what's been going on for years with the do high frequency, everything from 60 up to 10,000 hertz modulation in your displays and in your TV, your lighting. So what we do is I prefer to do the DC version, and where we convert way down here, and everything that goes to the bulb is, because one of the things that I think is going on, that a lot of people claim that EMF is a problem. I'm not disagreeing that it's a problem,
Uh-huh.
but most of the way of that, what they have to understand is that EMF is translating into the lights and they're flickering. And there was this really great study by Professor Light over in Alberta where he showed that the cell wall potential itself, he measured on single cells, he could turn the LED off and on, and that voltage would go up and down.
Right.
So we're not designed to handle really high frequency stuff. I mean, yeah, you can trick the eye to high enough frequency, the eye doesn't respond, but your cells are literally responding to kilohertz type responses or
Yeah.
modulation.
Yeah.
So what they may think is being an EMF problem may actually be a the EMF going into the bulb and the bulb translating that into you. So
Wow.
so there's all kinds of things to investigate and study and
Yeah.
understand. But at the end of the day, our goal is to get as close as we can to matching sunlight. As I said, I hope eventually we'll get to the point that we can add a little bit of UV back in,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
just to because that's what we're used to and that's what we expect. And it's really easy to put just a little, like I say, to put a lamp in and use it. read your paper or read a book underneath it, like you used to with the incandescents. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a good thing. So,
Right. Well, I think on your really exciting and interesting light bulbs and the progress of them, maybe we should stop there, because there's so much information you've handed to me on a plate there, and I've not even started going to my questions yet.
I'm sorry.
To be honest with you, you've probably answered most of them if I look at it, if I sit down later. But I'm really excited about seeing what Team UCL and you all come out with in the near future, as well.
Well, I mean, he's an amazing researcher, experimentalist, and he
Yeah,
spent a lot of time trying to understand the eye and how it's. But what I think that will be the next step that it goes on, in my opinion, is we start to, everything that's out there in the literature about how light interacts with the body is based on a very simple called geometric optics. Once the body is not so constrained.
yeah,
It's using these periodic structures. It's generating all kinds of variations and affecting biological processes, as Glenn shows. Just exposing for a short amount of time, you can affect glucose levels. You can do a lot of different things.
yeah,
Um, Doing that on a consistent basis is what I think the goal is. Not
mm,
to,
yeah,
you know, I I purposely disagree with a lot of the PBM stuff because it's kind of like a jolt and then nothing. And it's more important that we have a consistency across the day and night, and how we're
yeah.
expected to respond. Anyway, if you have any other questions, be happy to answer them sometime.
Well, yeah, yeah. I may well. I'm sure I will. But maybe we can come back to you another time. I think it'd be nice to have some of the other team with you as well. Actually,
That'd
and
be great.
I mentioned to you about the BBC coming to my daughter's school because the all systems go on the blue light glasses for the kids.
Yeah.
Um, and so I don't know whether someone like Bob or Glenn, just because of the time difference, it might be easier for them to speak to the BBC. So I'll let you know. I'll go through you, Scott, when we know what they're doing. But they're
Well,
going to
I
do
mean, I
TV,
don't.
radio, web, socials. The BBC are getting a film crew up, so we'll
Yeah,
at least begin to highlight some of this issue on TV.
yeah, and I think that one of the things is if we can get people to understand that there's a big difference between blue from an LED and blue from the sky,
Yeah,
and that that's what the reason for having a blue blocker glass. I don't disagree with it. It's just that it's unfortunate because it's not necessary if we had the other part, in my opinion.
correct. Yeah, it's not about it's. So, for example, with my daughter's school, and we're being in northern England, we're now heading into that time where it's going to get darker, so the lights will be on all day. Now, their classrooms do tend to have nice big windows as well, but um, there won't be that much light
Yeah.
coming through those windows. So that's where I would say it has its place. I wouldn't be asking people to wear blue light blocking glasses all day, every day,
I
when
mean,
they're especially outside.
and it's a shame that we have to sacrifice the information content in blue in order to try and deal with another problem. I mean,
Yeah,
and the displays, you know, like I say, I view our lights as being something that you have a monitor, two of our lights on either side reflects off the keyboard. You can generate a significant amount of near infrared into because you got 4.5 optical watts out of near infrared in each one of our lights
yeah,
bulbs.
yeah,
And will that solve problems? I don't know, but we're just getting this mode of we change something, create an artificial environment that then they have to go do something else to fix, you know,
yeah,
rather than just going back to the original,
Yeah,
that we know is works,
I
and
know.
that's the frustrating part.
People
Anyway,
don't like admitting they got it wrong, for starters.
yeah, well, that's a big problem. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
how do you go back to your customer base and say, those LEDs we saw, they're
yeah.
really not supposed to be
Oops.
used around children? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, 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 I know.
Anyway.
Oh, well. I will get the lawyers on the case, start threatening to sue them. They might change their minds then.
Well, if there even a small percentage of the issues associated that we're seeing within children in particular, we could adjust a little bit. That's
Yeah,
a huge effect.
of course.
A huge effect.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Scott, thank you so much for your time. It's
no
been an
problem.
absolute pleasure. Your depth of knowledge and understanding and grasp of this subject is remarkable,
No,
and really, really amazing to listen to. So thank you, and go back to enjoying the rest of your Sunday. Have a great day.
okay. Thank you.
Been an absolute pleasure. Take care. All the
Take care.
best.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.